Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about some of the best gameplay systems in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires that Creative Assembly should preserve going forward with Total War as a series. At number 5, we have instant construction, specifically the way it works for Dark Elves as opposed to the Chaos Dwarves. Because you see, Dark Elves have instant construction, but they also have regular building times for their settlement buildings. So this is why I think this works better for Dark Elves than it does for the Chaos Dwarves. Now, the reason the system is great, one, it's scalable the way it works in a campaign. So you play a campaign, you start getting some slaves early on, the strategic resource you're going to use for this, but then as you play the campaign further and further and further, you get more and more and more of this resource to use for instant construction, and of course a whole bunch of different things. But I do think instant construction is one of the great things about it, because you can either use it to play tall, to develop certain core settlements in your empire, get access to a bunch of different recruitment options, heroes, hero capacity, or you can use it to play wide in your campaign to really develop those frontline provinces faster. Even if the buildings are going to be lower tier and you do still have to deal with the growth system, it does incentivize you, regardless of how you're playing, to use it, and it does open up all kinds of different possibilities that you otherwise wouldn't have. And I think this is one of the core reasons why Dark Elves work so well at the moment in Warhammer 3. Now, this system was obviously introduced in Troy. I think that was the first time we saw the idea of instant construction. Could be wrong a bit on that. But it was introduced in Troy. It costs gold. It costs gold in Pharaoh. In Warhammer 3, it costs slaves, or if you're looking at the Chaos Dwarves, laborers. I think it's better balanced, actually, for the Dark Elves, because Chaos Dwarves have a lot of systems, but they're too slow given the current meta of the Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires campaign. And actually, even in Realms of Chaos, it could be said the same thing. So that is what I like. Like, you have a race that has the baseline construction times, but then you also can speed that up. But in order to speed that up, you have to use the strategic resource. So that creates choice, that creates consequences, that makes you think about how you're going to build your empire in a really smart way. So really great system over there by Creative Assembly, and one I hope they keep going forward. 4, we have the Scaven system for looting, occupying settlements, and occupying them at whichever level you want. So instead of having to deal with your regular growth system, waiting for settlements to slowly develop before you can get to those higher tiers where a lot of the fun stuff is available, you can get there pretty quickly in a campaign. Though keep in mind, there are significant penalties if you push this too far. So over here, for instance, it's actually not really a smart idea to get Tobaro to tier 3 as quickly as possible, because one, you consume all of your food, and that does impose penalties. I do think there's some balancing that they would need to do with the Scaven, actually, because of the way the food works, but I think inherently allowing a player to occupy a settlement for a strategic resource at the level they want is in itself a really great mechanic. It incentivizes you to think about settlements on the front line, like as potential like recruitment hubs or economic hubs, and gives you that kind of flexibility that you would otherwise be lacking in a campaign very, very early on. I think it's worth saying that in Total War, we've had this issue for years where the early game ends up feeling very, very samey in a lot of different campaigns. Well, not with the Scaven, simply because of this system. Because this system allows you to get to that high level quickly, to unlock those awesome units quickly, to unlock that hero capacity quickly, to unlock the economic potential in a campaign quickly. And because of that, Scaven campaigns inherently end up being far more interesting than most other races that you can play in a campaign. It's one of the core systems that makes Scaven one of the most interesting races to play in Warhammer 3. Could use some balancing, I won't dispute that, but I do think the idea of just being able to take settlements at whatever level you want is a great notion that ends up working very, very well for them. Of course, the downside is if you're not spending food, you will always take settlements at tier 1, but here's the thing. This is not really a downside because the way the game is played at the moment, on higher difficulties especially, you're kind of incentivized to take settlements from the AI that are high level and use their resources against them. Whereas with the Scaven system, you can't just abuse the AI, and abusing the legendary AI for its resources to try and get an advantage is a tried and true tactic, but I don't really think it's a great gameplay style that Creative Assembly has pushed over there. So Scaven bypassing that and not being able to do that, but still having a system that does give them a good amount of power, but it's based on actual player choice as opposed to just an AI difficulty modifier, is a great system in itself. And yes, I do believe this would work well with instant construction. I think they complement each other very, very well as two systems. And number 3, it is meat for the ogres. The ogres have entered the meat packing industry, though I don't think they care much about OSHA regulations. Joking aside, meat is a fantastic system. It is primarily used for the sake of constructing various buildings when you are playing an ogre campaign. And they're specifically used only for camps. So regular settlements still use coin. Meat is just used for the sake of camps. And what I really like about this system is it solves several issues at the same time. One, how do you make a camp system, a horde army, so to speak, quote unquote, horde? How do you make that system work in the context of a game? They've tried various things, but I think with the ogre camps is the first time that they've really nailed it. The ogre camps after Omens of Destruction, not pre-Omens of Destruction. So you can spend a lot of meat very quickly on these camps, and within 20 turns, let's say, you can get to a tier 5 camp and get access to all the kinds of unit recruitment, economic benefits, hero capacity benefits that you do have from a tier 5 camp. Now, this is of course based on the resource system that the castors have, which took it from Troy, and also you have Pharaoh. But I think the way it works for the ogres actually is much better than castors or Troy or Pharaoh. Because in Troy, Pharaoh, and castors, you have an economic situation where you're always struggling for resources early on, and then after like a dozen turns, 2 dozen turns, it becomes completely irrelevant. It doesn't create a great campaign dynamic. Here, however, you gain meat primarily through battle. Sure, there are ways to cheese it, like, recruiting lords over here and then, transferring the meat to a camp early on. A couple of balance changes, but compared to some of the issues that castors have had and Troy and Pharaoh factions have had, this is rather insignificant, I gotta tell you. So this in itself is really a great design decision by Creative Assembly because it makes it worthwhile. One, to get a lot of resources quickly and then spend those resources into a single settlement and develop that settlement or that camp to get to a high level. It used to be previously that as ogres, you wanted to get as many camps as possible as quickly as possible to ridiculous levels of nonsense. But now you kind of don't really care about that. In fact, you can probably play an entire ogre campaign with just one camp. It is worth it to get a very high level camp. It will give you a bunch of unit recruitment capabilities, hero recruitment capabilities. It does help that hero capacities increase for regular settlements, so that's great. But just having a resource that's like 99% of it is used for one specific purpose, and it scales based on battles. You fight battles, you get resources, you spend those resources into building stuff. It is fantastic. It is scalable, it is always useful throughout the course of a campaign, and it's not just something like you have with Cast Dwarves or Troy or Pharaoh, where you have a system, a resource system where it's just based on, you know, sitting around waiting for stuff to develop, the intern button simulator. No, you have to be active. You don't have to conquer a lot of territory to make this work. Absolutely not. But you do need to be active, finding stuff, finding the good fight, getting the meat, and hauling it back to the camps, transferring back to the camps to make it worthwhile. It makes the ogre playstyle a lot more interesting than it used to be, and it makes the idea of them being like this nomadic, mercenary type race far more appealing in the game. In fact, I think a lot more races could use it, as opposed to the dynamic that exists in so many other campaigns, which is like build wide, conquer a lot of stuff, sack, loot, settlements, rebuilding from scratch, all that stuff. I think ogres have really nailed the idea of how to make a faction work with very limited territory, in point of fact. There are benefits to controlling a lot of territory, to be sure. Like, you can get a lot of money for regular settlements, but keep in mind that developing those settlements is going to cost quite a bit of money. So there is a balancing act over there. You see, your regular settlements cost a lot of money, like 5,000 gold for tier 3, up to 4,000 gold for a tier 3 economic building, whereas camps just cost meat. So you do have that kind of balancing act in an ogre campaign. I think they've come as close as they possibly could, and making the idea of like a single province faction work. That and Khorne for bloodletting, because Khorne doesn't have a regular economy, but it is a fantastic change that Creative Assembly has implemented. And I think it is really the first time with the idea of resource, like the resource system implemented in Troy is a great idea. It's always been a question like how they balance it. I think that with the Ogre meat system, they've come the closest to perfecting the balance of it. I know, it obviously wouldn't work in the same way for every race, but it is a fantastic system all the same. And number 2 is the Warband upgrade system for the Warriors of Chaos. Originally developed for a Total War Saga Troy, for the Amazons to be specific. What this system does is give you a huge amount of flexibility in your campaign with an army, and allows you to have a wider variety of units than you normally would get, because there are just some units that are not worth getting their building for, or not worth going out of your way to recruit, but might be fun to play around with in certain situations. This is what the Warband upgrade system does provide during the course of a campaign. Now, Warband recruitment is a different discussion, a different situation, same with the gifted unit system. On top of that, what the Warband upgrade system does is it allows you to preserve your already existing army. So all that experience that you have with units, sure, you'll spend some of it in order to upgrade these units, but you do preserve some of it, and you are preserving the units that you've been using for multiple turns in a campaign. It isn't really a great feeling when you're playing a campaign and you realize at one point, well, I'm just going to disband half my army or my entire army because I can get a bunch more better units very, very easily and very quickly to replace them. This system makes your armies feel your own. It gives you ownership, really, in a way that other systems just don't in a campaign. And it is such a phenomenal system that I would recommend everyone that's playing Warhammer 3 to get the Warband upgrade mod, the ultimate version, for every single campaign, every single race in the game. It does add a lot more diversity, it adds variety, and makes campaigns just flat out more interesting. I think it should be a baseline system for every race in the game. To a degree or another, implementation, balancing, those are discussions, but as an idea, it is one of the best systems that Creative Assembly has designed in years. And finally, at number 1, is the Grudge System of the Dwarves. Not just the Age of Reckoning. The Age of Reckoning is a great system for the sake of a campaign because it incentivizes to go out there, do stuff every single turn because of the kind of benefits it does provide. But on top of that, you also have the legendary grudges to deal with. So these are longer term campaign objectives beyond the regular campaign objectives that you do have. Furthermore, it does also provide a system of guaranteed confederation with every other legendary lord in a campaign, which makes campaigns inherently more interesting because as opposed to just dealing with your own little corner of the campaign map, you have a far wider bit of territory to deal with. So all these things combined, be it the short-term objectives of the Age of Reckoning, the long-term objectives of the Legendary Grudges, combined with the Confederation mechanic, ends up making Dwarven campaigns some of the most dynamic and interesting and varied campaigns that you can have at the moment in Warhammer 3. It certainly helps that Dwarves do have a whole bunch of different systems that also do add up. Besides the deeps, the research tree, crucially giving you things like population surplus for newly captured settlements. Inherently, having a dynamic objective system in a campaign is a fantastic thing to begin with. To be sure, in terms of dynamic objectives, one can argue that Arbol's objective system or Oxial's objective systems are better, absolutely, but it is the combination of short-term objectives, long-term objectives, and Legendary Lord Confederations that make this specific mechanic, this system, works so brilliantly in the context of Warhammer 3 and in the context of Total War as a whole. So this is something that Creative Assembly should absolutely keep above most other things on this list. Like, if there was any system I believe they should keep above everything else, it would be the idea of the Grudge System. Doesn't matter what they call it, but I think it is a great idea that they implemented properly in the game.